Hello, we're talking about the human digestive system as part of our new unit on enzymes and digestion. So the first thing we want to make sure that you know is a little bit of the geography, the anatomy of the human digestive system. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about this part before. So we're going to actually start by going the order in which food goes through the digestive system. We'll actually just draw like a little pathway through here. Food's going to go down this way through here into this organ and down all the way through all of these, and then it's going to then end up leaving through here and through here and out and down. So you don't necessarily need to follow that track, but that is basically what it's going to do. You know, it goes through a long convoluted tube right there, and then eventually out this way and out the other end. And all the while it's doing that, it's getting broken down, absorbed, and then what's left over is not really going to be much of any of the food that was initially eaten. So let's start where it begins right here, which is the mouth. So the food is going to enter through your mouth, and the first thing that comes into contact with are going to be your teeth, which I don't have labeled there, but I think you know where your teeth and your tongue, which are going to help move things around. And then it's also going to come into contact with saliva, which is produced by the salivary glands. Then your food is going to be carried down your esophagus and then enter your stomach. So one thing to note is the stomach, it's actually right at the bottom of your rib cage, and it's on the left-hand side. So a lot of times when you say, oh, I feel like I have a stomach ache, really what you're probably feeling is the large intestine, which we'll talk about in a second. So then the food enters from the stomach into the small intestine, which is labeled here. And then after that, then it enters the large intestine. And then finally, again, not really much left over of the food by the time it gets to the rectum, and then finally where it exits is going to be the anus. So there's some other accessory organs here. You have the liver, the largest internal organ in your body, the gallbladder, a structure that's right here below the liver, and it is actually kind of greenish in color. You have the pancreas, a gland that secretes lots of chemicals into your small intestines. And then the last part up here is the appendix, and I just put the appendix here because it's a specific structure, but it's actually really just a part of the large intestine. So what does your digestive system actually do? So the first thing it does is mechanical digestion. So this is what your teeth do, and it's literally just breaking down your food into smaller pieces. So it doesn't actually change the food's composition, it just breaks it down into smaller pieces. Where your food's getting broken down composition-wise into something different than it is chemical digestion. And we've learned about this process already. It's the process of food getting broken into building blocks via the process of hydrolysis, which is, if you remember, adding water to break bonds. So most of your foods are polymers, and they're going to get broken down into monomers. Peristalsis is the muscular movements that move your food through. Absorption. This is where the building blocks are transported into the blood, and that happens down in your intestines. And what's going on there is it's taking, all the nutrients that you produced, and the reason why it goes into your blood is because your blood then takes it around to all your cells, because again, the cells are the main things that are doing all the things that make you alive. Then you have ingestion, the intake of food, and then elimination, the release of food. Notice how I have these letters M, C, P, A, I, and E. I'm going to be labeling where those processes are, or what processes are taking place at the different organs. So we're going to go through here. Turn on my pen. So the mouth is where ingestion is going to take place. And the teeth are specifically what are going to be mechanically digesting, along with the tongue. And then the salivary glands are going to be doing chemical digestion. So what's happening in the mouth? So it's the entrance to the digestive tract, and it's physically grinding up the food into an easy to swallow mass called a bolus. And then your salivary gland produces saliva, which contains an enzyme called amylase. We're going to talk about enzymes in much more detail later. But what amylase does is it breaks down starch into smaller molecules. It breaks them down into maltose or disaccharides. The esophagus, all the esophagus is doing is peristalsis, just moving food down. So it just passes it down to the stomach. The stomach is where you're going to have some mechanical digestion. That's the grinding up of the food, and that's done through peristalsis. And the other thing that happens in the stomach is strong enzymes and a strong acid and an enzyme called pepsin are going to break down proteins into small dipeptides. So that's going to be an example of chemical digestion. The liver. The liver's not really doing anything in terms of stuff with the food. It's going to produce a chemical called bile, and the gallbladder is going to store and secrete bile. So what we can say, bile, it's specifically, is going to help with chemical digestion. The small intestine, I would say, is the star of the digestive tract. And in fact, many animals that just have a mouth and an anus, in between, everything else is gut or small intestine. So the small intestine, the reason why this is the star is it's going to do chemical digestion, but it's going to do a more important part, which is absorption. So it's the location for the breakdown of all the nutrients into their component monomers. So that's what this is talking about right here. And carbohydrates are going to be broken down into glucose, specific or monosaccharides. Lipids are going to be broken down into fatty acids. Proteins are going to be broken down into amino acids. And nucleic acids are going to be broken down into nucleotides. And this down here really is where absorption is really taking place. And that's in what's called the villus. So this is a single villus, and there are millions of villi that line the small intestine. So if I were to draw the small intestine over here, or a line, a cross section of the small intestine, so like imagine there's the tube. This is just going to be lined with millions and millions of little tiny fingers, to the point where it's going to look like it's carpeting, and that's going to be all the way through. So all the way down here is going to be just more and more and more. I'm not going to draw it all, but you get the point. So all the way around is going to be lined with these, and each of these little villi has tiny blood vessels. So the nutrients that are going to be in here, they're going to end up being drawn into the blood vessels. And that blood vessel is then going to transport it to the cells. The pancreas, producing pancreatic juice, so doing chemical digestion. So many of the enzymes that are secreted in the small intestine are going to be used to break down food. Large large intestine. It's for absorption, so it absorbs water and vitamins from your food. But basically, by the time your food gets to the large intestine, really all it is just stuff that your body is not able to break down. And there are some components to some food, like fiber, that is not able to be broken down, and that just pretty much stays there. But what really happens is the bacteria are going to consume that, and some of the bacteria are going to produce the vitamins that you're going to need. But again, the main thing that happens here is the absorption of water, and this is the reason why when I say that your large intestine, also referred to as your colon, is usually the source of pain when it comes to abdominal pain, or when you say you have an upset stomach. Really what you have is a large intestine problem. And oftentimes what you feel is the lack of the large intestine not being able to absorb water properly. And usually the reason why that happens is because you haven't eaten enough fiber, because fiber is needed to there's like little tiny siphons all along the walls of the large intestine, and they need to be cleaned out every so often so that they can more properly siphon out the water. So if they're clogged, you get what's called colitis, and you're not able to absorb the water, and then the water just stays there, and then the only place that water can go is out the back end, and that's diarrhea. So all the stuff that you don't like that happens, that's what happens. So the appendix doesn't really have a function, so we'll just put a line there. The rectum is kind of like storage. It passes feces to the anus. So I would say the rectum is kind of like the equivalent of the esophagus. It's really just as peristalsis. And by the way, so this guy here is going to do peristalsis. And let me go back to here. This is going to do peristalsis too. So let's cross off that one and just put a P there. So that's going to be doing peristalsis as well. So peristalsis is really what's going to happen in the rectum only, and then the anus is just going to be the elimination. It's where everything's released. So if we look here, this is my summary of what part of your foods are broken down where. So the first thing to note is that everything is going to be using the small intestine, and everything is going to be using pancreatic juices. But specifically, proteins are going to be broken down by the stomach, and carbohydrates are going to be broken down by the mouth, by the salivary glands. So fats don't get broken down until the small intestine, and the fats more specifically are going to be using the liver and the gallbladder, which produces bile. So again, all of them use the pancreas and the small intestine. But the ones that are unique are the mouth for the carbohydrates and proteins breaking down your stomachs being broken down in your proteins being broken down in your stomach.